Hello, everyone. We're now live. Welcome, everyone, to Blogging Theology Academy. My name is Paul Williams. Assalamu alaikum. I'm delighted to welcome you today to this special taster session and Q&A for our forthcoming Diploma in Programming, Video Games and Society, taught by none other than the industry legend Shahid Kamal Ahmad. And this groundbreaking course is tailored for Muslim professionals across a wide spectrum of disciplines, from developers and designers to educators, policymakers, and cultural critics, as well as anyone interested in how video games have shaped and continue to shape the modern world. With over 40 years of pioneering experience spanning programming, game design, music, production, publishing, business development, and leadership at the highest levels, Shahid offers a uniquely rich and holistic perspective. In this course, he will guide students through the foundational principles of code, what it is, why it matters, and how a deep understanding of it is key to appreciating the profound cultural, spiritual, and societal impact of video games in our time. So over to you, sir.
Jazakallah khair once again for that wonderful introduction. I should get you to write all of my introductions, Paul. So I'm not going to cover who I am or my history or the nature of Code is Just. We're just going to go straight into a small sample of my teaching and communication style, and hope inshallah that it resonates. I welcome interaction, Q&A throughout. Feel free to stop me at any point, though we do have a scheduled Q&A at the end of this short session. So I will leave that in your hands, Paul.
Thank you.
So the purpose of this taster session is for me to show you just a brief example of my delivery style. In the diploma, there will be slides with supporting visuals as required, but today I'm going to connect some dots for you that might be surprising, inshallah. So the first thing I want to talk about is that video games are not game theory. Game theory, as many of you may remember from Russell Crowe's portrayal of John Nash in A Beautiful Mind, is about the intersection of mathematics, economics, and psychology. But video games operate differently. So first, we're going to talk about brains. Brains are designed for pattern matching. Note I use the word designed quite deliberately. I have to draw inspiration from Paul's ongoing series about hashtag no design. I enjoy those posts particularly. So brains are designed for pattern matching, and nowhere is this more apparent than with faces. We see them everywhere, even where none exist, and this is a phenomenon called pareidolia. A child's first line sketch, a low-resolution stream, unlike this one, rocks on the moon, the brain cries out, face! And this shows that our brains are amazing at rendering a personal reality from sometimes very limited data. Our brains have to make assumptions or we'd become overwhelmed. Think about learning how to drive, for example. If you had that feeling of overwhelm every time you went out in a car, you can imagine the state of the roads. You might think they couldn't possibly be any worse, but if our brains weren't so great at aggregating data efficiently, patterning it into blocks, and then switching it into autopilot, we'd be in a lot of trouble. And the process of learning overwhelms us at first, but we soon extract the lesson. We abstract it, and we use it as a building block for the next level of complexity. Some of us will go on to become Formula One drivers. Some of us, like myself, will probably regress and need to take another driving test at some point. So when we talk about a building, our brains fashion up a simplified block without referencing the foundations, the electrical wiring, the plumbing, the insulation, the ground on which it's built, and so on. We create abstractions. We have this model of a building, and we refer to that model. And we then develop shared language around what that model represents. Very rarely do we consider the detail underneath. This is why drawing a photorealistic representation of a person is so difficult. The goal is to draw exactly what we see. And we're so good at abstraction that seeing the face and the world as it is extraordinarily difficult. When we fail to detect a pattern, we call it random. But randomness is often just temporarily hidden order. If we apply ourselves and the system offers enough feedback, we discover structure where previously we saw only noise. That discovery lights up the brain, and you can see it on fMRIs. As a game example, if we're shooting zombies, for example, but not collecting much money with which to buy weapon upgrades to take care of the increasingly tougher zombies, despite seemingly killing the same amount as other players do, we could get frustrated. And I know I did. But if the game gives us enough feedback, we would see that headshots give us more money with fewer bullets, and now we're improving our gameplay by going for headshots. The game hasn't changed. We have just sensed order in the game that was previously just noise to us. This sensing of order is what lights the brain up. Again, the game hasn't changed. The system was always there. What changed was your perception. You learned to extract signal from the noise. You didn't just play better, you saw better, you perceived better. On the other hand, if the player is given huge resources to begin with, and the zombies are so weak that they don't present any kind of challenge to the player at all, the game quickly becomes boring. Gameplay isn't differentiated for any player. Their experience is the same. There's no avenue for the expression of skill, and the player walks away bored. I'm sure there are a few teachers and perhaps YouTubers, so not in this company, that make you want to walk away too. Now, it's the game designer's job to ensure that just before the player gives up in frustration, they find the order that they've been missing, and to assure that the game is not so easy that they stop playing before the game presents a new challenge. Keeping this balance between difficulty and boredom is the key. So let's talk about what we're leading to here. This is what we call flow state. I'm sure you've all heard of this expression, but let's talk about it a bit more formally. Flow is what happens when challenge and skill meet right at the edge of your ability. It's the tightrope, if you like, between boredom and frustration, when you're fully present, fully engaged. I'm sure you can think about certain teachers in the past who did that for you, who challenged you, presented you with new ideas, but fed you bits at a time until you got to a more skillful level. Teachers are trained to recognize that aha moment, the brain lighting up, the fMRI image aglow. And they respond by giving positive feedback and sharing that with the rest of the class. So the flow state occurs when you're active, conscious, and fully present. These are all really important. Most formal definitions use the terms active and present. I've deliberately inserted conscious because there is an Islamic term called ghafla. Some people might criticize video games as being a form of ghafla, that is, an engagement in heedlessness. But that's not what I'm advocating. I'm advocating the mindful engagement of games, which requires your consciousness to be fully there. So not heedlessness at all, but a willingness to draw from what is being presented to you, to apply lessons, to go in with a plan. And to be clear, by conscious, I don't mean self-conscious. This temporary loss of self is a key ingredient of the flow state. And again, by loss of self, I don't mean heedlessness. It's really important to understand this. I mean the egoic self, the kind that, for example, in a lesson behaves a little bit like I did in chemistry class back in 1980. And my teacher lightly mocked me for being a bit of a know-it-all, when actually I didn't know it all. I was just winging it. That's bringing the ego into a lesson. That's not what I'm advocating, not with games, not with any form of learning. Another factor of flow state is the loss of the sense of time. This is why kids can spend hours in a video game, and adults can spend the same in artistic or spiritual endeavors. Now, scrolling through TikTok is not flow state because you're not conscious, right? So this is a really important differentiator. You're not even present. What's happened is that you have become heedless when you're just scrolling through TikTok. Now, I'm not judging anybody here. Far be it from me to judge when I've been guilty of this. But it is possible to develop rituals, if you like, and to engage in training that allows you to recover that consciousness, if you like, that awareness of what's going on, and thereby make adjustments. Do something more productive, for example, right in the middle of a scrolling session. It's possible. Now, back to flow. Flow does require that you do something you enjoy, but using just enough of your skill so you feel challenged. Flow state gives us a huge sense of agency, and games are incredible at providing this. There are few areas of life where we have true agency, and as Muslims, we know that our agency is circumscribed by Allah in all cases. But to the extent that we do have agency, video games are the most advanced sandboxes for the inducement of flow state ever invented. It would be derelict of us to ignore them as a delivery mechanism for the good of humanity. Now, when a parent asks, what have you got to show for all that time spent in that video game of their child? They're ignoring the fact that the flow state reached in the playing of that game provides intrinsic reward. That's another feature of flow state, that the activity in itself is its own reward. They're not doing it to get a loot box at the end. That might be a byproduct of their play, but the play itself provides intrinsic reward. They feel good about themselves. This is exactly the same thing that happens in a really good lesson with a really good teacher when insight is achieved. And this is happening because a child is not just practicing their skill, they're being challenged. And this process, often encoded by the game designer, is an accelerated, intensified version of a skill that all human beings need for life. The skill of pattern recognition, of plucking order from chaos, of the nobility of fitra over the hopelessness of the nafs. The child, immersed in play, is not wasting time. They're exercising one of the most fundamental human faculties, recognizing order amidst chaos. This isn't trivial. It mirrors the deeper struggles of the soul to rise from the hopelessness of the nafs into alignment with fitra, with the order Allah has placed within the creation. Now that's it for now. I welcome any questions. In the diploma, I will be expanding on this significantly, not just with slides, but more importantly, you might not like this, but with spreadsheets that show you exactly how flow state is engineered, how the numbers are tuned, how human beings are involved in the tuning of those numbers, and how exactly the same methods are used in every system in use today. So with that, Paul, I'd like to hand back to you.
Thank you. That was very beautiful, actually. I really enjoyed that. Very beautiful. I enjoyed that a great deal. If people have any questions for Shahid, please post your questions, and I'll put them up on the screen or read them out to Shahid. I put the link in one of the comments to Blogging Theology Academy, so where you can apply now for BT Academy's new diploma in programming, video games, and society, taught by Shahid himself. I'll just show you. In fact, I'll just before I mention the questions, I'll just share the screen so you can see. There we go. So here's the website, bloggingtheologyacademy.com. Application is now open. You can apply, and it's got the start date, which is the 15th, by the way, 15th of this month. 2 terms of 13 weeks, level 1, level 2. The level and admission requirements, the fees, the application process, and the deadline, which is on the 12th of June, and more information there. So do have a look at the website as well. Our first question, I wonder what difference is between being an avid reader and a gamer. I've always read but never played games, but it feels somewhat similar, he says, or she says.
Yeah, that's a valid point. The biggest difference between reading, which, although I'm a great advocate of, I don't think anyone's a greater advocate of reading than you, Paul. Witness the vast array of.
Well, it could all be green screen, couldn't it? Is it real? Is it really real?
I've seen it long enough to know that it isn't.
Oh, really?
I've looked for the cracks. They're not there.
They're not there. Wait,
So,
anyway, sorry.
no, it's fine. It's a lovely diversion. So the biggest difference between reading and playing video games, they both are able to create worlds that the person engaging with the material inhabits, both during reading or playing the game and outside. You take that world with you, right? But the biggest difference is agency. Yes, there is a great degree of skill required to further your reading ability by progressing to more challenging reading. Some reading is particularly dense, and it requires, you can't just speed read it, right? So one of the things I note in the world of productivity videos is this desire to read as much as possible, when actually the real difficulty would be in taking one single text, take for example the Quran, making that your primary text, and reading, rereading constantly. And as Muslims, we do that throughout our lives. The Quran that I read today is not the same Quran that I read 40, 50 years ago. And it's not because the Quran has changed. I have changed. God forbid that the Quran has changed. It's protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a book only changes because you change. But this cult of productivity drives us to read more and more. That is a form of addiction. It is a form of greed. It doesn't necessarily increase you in knowledge. So I think it's really careful to define reading not just as the singular practice of the faculty of being able to read and understand words, but the ability to engage with more dense texts as your ability, your vocabulary, your understanding, your comprehension, your representation, and your articulation of what you've engaged with improves over time. That is the idea. So if you treat reading as a skill, then it's quite similar to video games. The key thing here is that with both reading and with playing video games, to bring your full consciousness, your full awareness to what you're doing. That's the key. Video games accelerate that process. For example, I've mentioned in a few talks before that my son, having having endured vicious bullying at a very young age, I allowed him to play a video game. It was a suitable video game. It was Super Mario Odyssey. He actually learned to read from playing Super Mario Odyssey because the incentive structure was such that only through reading and really engaging, bringing his full consciousness to bear on the text over time, was he able to work out how to improve his ability in the game. As such, it proved to be an incredible parallel for life, but in a safe setting. Now, a book alone wouldn't have been able to do that. A book and a teacher, however, and I mean a really skilled teacher, would have done a better job, not of the game, but of teaching. A book, a teacher, and a highly qualified game designer would have been able to make it as engaging as a video game. Because the key differentiator here also is that reading obviously doesn't require graphics, and most video games are graphically rich. So they're more representative of a created reality, that of the game developer, than the book is. Now, of course, we have to separate books into fiction and non-fiction, but I'm talking primarily of fiction in this case. But nevertheless, even in non-fiction, for example, the Quran, you can't tell me that the imagery described of heaven and hell aren't shocking and beautiful in equal measure. And the greater one's iman, the more powerful and resonant those images become. And that's purely from text. One doesn't need a game depicting hell or heaven for us to be able to create a reality in our heads that far exceeds anything a video game could do. There are pluses and minuses, but I say, to cut a very long answer shorter than it should be, because this is something that we could go on for quite some length, is that the key point here is agency. That's the differentiator. So the key advantage of video games is agency, real-time, interactive. And with books, the key advantage is the imagination that is stimulated in the reading.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. We got a number of new questions coming in. So not all of them I understand, to be honest, but I'll just flash them up, show them up on the screen. Zainab says, but wonder in gaming world is limited. Person blue holding pencil. Does that make sense to you? It's quite cryptic.
It is cryptic. I'm not sure I quite understand it. I'm going to focus on the first part. I'm thinking that the second part of the question is perhaps a text translation of some kind of emoji, but that's me pattern matching. But wonder in gaming world is limited. Yes, because video games are a model. They model an aspect of reality, and they are fundamentally limited. Another word for model in this case is simulation. And what do we live in? We live in a simulation. Allah describes this world as the enjoyment of delusion. Our senses necessarily are very limited transmitters of raw data to very limited brains, which can only perceive an absolutely infinitesimal amount of true base reality, whatever that might be. which is only discernible in its full magnificence to us when we pass on from this plane. That's if we make it to the good place and not the bad place, right? So video games are limited, but they're necessarily limited. And the reason for that is they're designed to simulate one system at a time. You might consider games with multiple systems, but again, those systems are limited. And it's the interaction between you and those systems and the emergence of gameplay that comes from that that creates the richness of a video game environment. But they are necessarily limited. The downside is they're not accurate to reality. The upside is they're not accurate to reality. So the consequences are less severe than in real life. If you want to experiment with gravity, I would suggest you experiment in a video game and not in real life, for example.
Okay. Another question here. Will there be any philosophy of gaming classes, including in the course? The world seems like a structured code, and humanity looks like the chain of loop where spiritual intervention is intertwined.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, 1/3 of the course is society. And my approach to society is through the lens of Islam. I was explaining this to one of my grown-up children yesterday, and that the biggest difference between Western thinking and Islamic thinking is that with Western thinking, and this is my interpretation, with Western thinking, it's about classification and division. Whereas Islamic thinking is to underpin all thought with Islam, with Tawheed, with Iman. We approach everything with our Islamic glasses on because the world makes much more sense that way. And we're better equipped to deal with the world that way. And I think Muslims have a duty to describe that viewing of the world in as many forms as possible. And video games just happens to be one of those forms, and probably one of the most useful in terms of describing limited amounts of the reality we inhabit. And that surely falls under the banner of philosophy. It won't be overemphasized, but there will be an Islamic approach to the use of video games.
Okay, very interesting. There's one question here has to be dealt with, I think, for some people. Is playing games haram, though? I mean, there is this question of the, is it halal, in fact?
Yeah, I am not authorized to issue fatwas. Okay. There are differing opinions on this, as there are with other forms of entertainment. The way I see it is that video games are a simulation. It's what the simulation portrays and what the player does and the state of mind of the player that makes it haram or halal. So this is my opinion, okay? It's not a fatwa. I'll give you an example. Let's say I have a taster session to deliver on Monday evening for Blogging Theology Academy. And instead of preparing thoughtfully, considerately, carefully with the material that I'm going to discuss and to make sure it all hangs together, that I spend that time playing a video game instead. And while I'm playing that video game, my mind is switched off. I'm on autopilot. I'm just passing the time. That is haram on many levels. It's haram because I'm failing in my duty to deliver this talk. It's haram because I'm wasting time, the only resource that is non-replenishable. It's haram because I might have forgotten my salah. It's haram because I'm forgetting my creator. Do you see what I mean? There's a big difference. However, if in the preparation of this talk, I played a game to investigate a particular aspect, like, for example, the way systems in Call of Duty Black Ops 6 Zombies mode escalate the difficulty and apportion the in-game currency in order to allow you to meet the rising demands the game places on you, and to see parallels between that and teaching. That's me engaging with the material consciously, and that I would consider halal. Again, my opinion. Please don't take my word for it. Consult a qualified sheikh. I'm very much against a reductionist approach to Islamic principles. To outright condemn something as haram or to outright validate it as halal, I think is narrow and needs to be pondered a lot more carefully. And if we give a blanket view, then people with good intentions and bad intentions will take the fatwa they want and go with it. And that's not my intention. My intention is not to give you certainties, but to uncover models that further uncover reality and to approach it consciously and with hikmah.
Good. Before we go on, I just want to put up on the screen the Blogging Theology Academy website for the diploma in programming. Let's get this one up. So if you go to bloggingtheologyacademy.com, there's the application form for BT Academy's diploma in programming and video games and society 2025 to 2026. So do go there. I put the link in the comments as well. So do have a look at that. So let's go to the next question, which is rather interesting. Salam, is gaming mainly geared towards men? And does any gamer diminish his or her chances at integrating better in the real social environment, in the real world, I guess? So there's two questions.
Yeah, that's a good question and a loaded question. So I'm going to unpack it a little, if I may. The perception is that the gamer is some unwashed youth in mama's basement playing video games all day long, swearing at all and sundry on a chat session while taking part in violent gameplay and reading right-wing blogs and reposting Tommy Robinson or whoever the American equivalent is, right? That's the cliche. The fact is, gaming is the most successful entertainment form in the world, and as such, and by successful, I don't mean Muslim successful, right? I don't mean Islamically. So when I use that term, I mean commercially. So it couldn't be that if it didn't have a female audience. So while the cliche in the media is that of a male, the reality is that there are an awful lot of female gamers out there who don't always in multiplayer environments reveal their identity because sadly they would get grief from male participants. There's also the phenomenon of male players using female avatars in games. So it's very hard to tell whether the person in a multiplayer game that you're playing against is male or female anyway. That's the first thing. The audience is more diverse than the media might lead us to believe. That's the other thing. I do agree that mass market games were leaning more towards the male audience because they were the biggest customer, right? My belief is that if we get more Muslims involved in this industry, we will ensure wider engagement. And why is that? Because it's a market. For a start, there are close to 2 billion, if not more than 2 billion Muslims in the world right now. That's a big piece of pie, right? So if you wanted to attract that market of 2 billion potential customers, wouldn't you want to make something that adhere to their sensibilities? That's the question I'd like to pose back. And I think the answer is very clear. Going back to 1980, there was a game called Pac-Man. The interesting data from that time was that it was played slightly more by females than males, and it was one of the most successful arcade games of all time. That's 1980, it's 45 years ago. Since then, there have been many newsworthy games that seem to be more male dominated, but the reality is that there are plenty of female gamers. There wouldn't be such a big market if games were made exclusively for males. But yes, we should address other markets. Why? Not because of a diversity play, but for commercial reasons. For example, Asda introduced a halal section in their supermarkets quite some time ago. You can imagine that they increased their market share. The only people they offended were a tiny minority of people who make a disproportionate amount of noise about whether halal should be permitted or not. But those people aren't spending a lot of money. Muslims with their wallets are vastly outspending those few dissenters. So the marketplace tends to win in these situations.
Okay. The next question, any advice on how to approach media channels with a new game, especially for indie developers?
Yeah, that's a question that requires a lot more than a video to address. It requires a great deal of knowledge of the video games industry. And it's not necessarily the right question to ask, although there's no wrong question as such. I think a more accurately phrased question would ask, how do I get more eyes on my game? And that is a science as well as an art. It's the same question as, how do I get more views on my video? Or how do I get more listens on my podcast? It's exactly the same question. It's all about capturing attention. And there are so many mechanisms for capturing attention that it'd be impossible to enumerate them all here. But I would recommend reading the traditional books on sales and marketing, the books that teach advertising, for example. Some of the greatest advertisers to have existed in the Western world were around decades ago, and their works are still seminal. I would recommend, for example, watching the videos or listening to the talks of Rory Sutherland, who's an outstanding communicator and one of the best marketers Britain's ever produced. So it's a deep subject. It changes from week to week. It's not necessarily about whatever technique is working now, because whatever people are saying is working now will not necessarily work next week. I would recommend studying the fundamentals of capturing attention. Read the works of Robert Cialdini. He did the famous, perhaps some might say authoritative work on it called Persuasion. More recently, he wrote a book called Persuasion, which is even more relevant today. These are the fundamentals that we need to absorb if we want to understand how to capture attention better. Some people get lucky, but most do it by regularly producing great content. So you will get attention if your content is noteworthy. If your content captures somebody's attention, the likelihood is that it will become viral. Or rather, there's a much stronger possibility that it will become viral if you're doing something unique, attention capturing, and that provides value, and you start sharing, and you do it diligently, repeatedly. I mean, take Paul's channel for an example. He didn't always have 500,000 plus subscribers. How do you think that happened? It didn't happen overnight. He showed up, video after video after video, book read after book read after book read, person spoken to, listened to, interviewed, again and again and again, refining his technique in this endless pursuit of improving communication, of the vast amounts of knowledge that he has learned. It takes time. Nobody wants to hear that, especially when they're young, but it's worth it because there's no shortcut to mastery and there's no shortcut to getting attention. Let me give you a quick example. Stardew Valley was a first game made by somebody that achieved incredible financial success, but it took 5 to 7 years to make a full-time effort. And that was only after years and years and years of studying games of a similar nature and understanding how they worked. So you could say it was overnight success for this first-time indie developer, or you could say it was 14 years of study and development. Take your pick.
Can also add my bit. Sorry, this is completely off topic, but when I started off BT, I was given some very serious advice from people who knew what they were talking about. I was producing quite long videos because I wanted to, and I was told, Paul, you really need to produce much shorter videos, 10 minutes max, because people just can't bear long videos. You know, they're not going to watch them. And I ignored this very wise advice from people who knew what they were talking about, simply because I wasn't producing videos to get a big audience. I was producing them because I enjoyed the content. I was interested in the books and the people and the topics. And so I kind of did it because I thought it was it had value in itself, and ignored the advice. And of course, I did the right thing, it turns out, in ignoring that. And I'm thinking there's one video, a 4-hour video by Professor El Tubki from one of the Ivy League universities in the United States. He did it on Islam and LGBT and all that. 4 hours long from a top academic. And it's had, I think, 250,000 views. And
I'm one of them.
Yeah, it was fantastic. 4-hour. It set the gold standard for many for the Islamic response to this issue, as it was a couple of years ago. And the secret of success, it was simply the content was just sterling. It was absolutely brilliant content. But it broke all the rules, but nevertheless it worked, alhamdulillah. So anyway, enough about that. Back to
that's a very important story. You did what you thought was right, and you did it for your own reasons, but you did it long enough that you found your audience. And that's the beauty of online. It's the beauty of the connected world, that sooner or later you'll find your people and your people will find you.
Yeah, very true. So the next question, very good question, I think. Is it possible to develop games ethically, avoiding intentional addictive aspects? And how can we get around certain rulings that can be detrimental to the standard gaming experience, music/drawing? Not 100%
Okay.
understand that. Maybe you get that.
Okay. So this touches on many points of fiqh which I'm not qualified to answer. So I will answer the video games related material. So most companies believe they're acting ethically. Most companies that develop video games believe they're acting ethically. There were a few that used the cutting-edge psychology of the time to encourage addictive behavior in those people who weren't fully developed. Why is this important? We now understand that the prefrontal cortex doesn't hold the reins of its impulses for males until age 25. That's really important. So if you have a 16 to 21-year-old playing a video game that has a ton of loot boxes and they want to progress and impress their friends, or worse, people underage, people who aren't able to control their expenditure and abuse their parents' accounts, that can be a real problem. Thankfully, the video games industry addressed this itself with all kinds of bodies, governing bodies, and bodies that provided guidelines for ethical behavior, and loot boxes became frowned upon in free-to-play games, and a lot of those transactions became more and more difficult. Sadly, it's still possible to play such games, which, while technically meeting the letter of a self-imposed law, don't do it in the spirit of the law, which I believe would be to restrict such games. In fact, should restrict gambling, should restrict all kinds of other activity that involves impulses, including, and this is very controversial coming from me, driving. There's a reason why insurance companies charge such a massive premium to male drivers under the age of 25. It's because they have the actuary tables that prove that statistically, young male drivers are much more likely to crash their cars and to behave impulsively on the road, right? The figures exist. So we're talking about the development of the prefrontal cortex and the ability to control the nafs, which isn't fully developed. So why we should be patient with young people, especially with young men. I believe females are able to hold the reins of their impulses at a younger age than 25. I don't have the data to hand. I'll have to look that up, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. But certainly in males, that impulsive isn't reined in until the age of 25. Most video games are developed ethically. Now, let's move on to your other point around imagery and music. So again, I would say this is one for a sheikh to answer authoritatively, but I don't believe in black and whites in Islam. I'm not an absolutist. I'm constantly in search of better, and may Allah always keep us on that search for better. But as far as imagery and music is concerned, I'm sorry to say it's absolutely ubiquitous. It's almost impossible to escape. I consider modern music a form of oppression, which, given I have an array of musical instruments behind me, is quite a thing to say. But by modern music, I'm talking about its ubiquity. You go to a shopping mall, there's music. You sit on a tube train, somebody's got their AirPods on really loud, and all you can hear is their music. It seems like you can't get away from it.
It is true. I was I was in New York a week and a half ago in New York City, and I went into several different restaurants on different days, and there was music, loud music playing in the restaurants. And then when you went to the restroom, it was even louder in the restroom. And I thought, it's everywhere. And you know, I didn't ask for this bloody music to be put on. There was no areas of silence or quietude or anything. Even when you go into the restroom, it was loud, and that was typical in New York. And I thought, this is really, as you say, the oppression of music in the modern world.
Yeah, it's absolutely everywhere. You can't escape it. In fact, it was used as a form of torture by Americans in Abu Ghraib and in Guantanamo, and of course to one another. It's done in the West, and sadly, some Muslims have fallen into this practice of constantly listening to music as well. Now, I believe, this is my belief, this is not fatwa again, I've got to qualify that there's an intention behind the music, right? So if, for example, I very infrequently listen to music, which is true. I used to listen to music a lot. I hardly ever listen to music now. If it's not done mindfully, it's potentially ghafla, heedlessness. If the lyrics are profane or lewd, I would consider that completely haram, because it's an incitement to lewdness. It's a normalization of lewdness, and that I don't think is edifying. And as Muslims, we do our best to become as edified as we possibly can, right? And the more we expose ourselves to such material, the harder that gets. So it depends on context. Is it possible to remain conscious and pay heed to what you're doing while you're doing it? If you can do that, then I believe it's okay. I don't believe there's a completely strict prohibition on all music. For example, the Prophet ﷺ allowed drums and singing. Some Muslims, I would say, have taken that letter of the law and extended it massively, which I think defeats the object. So I think this is about intent. Is it about whiling away hours of time in pointless entertainment where you completely forget about your creator? If so, then I would say that's in that time, but not in and of itself haram, whatever the music that you're listening to. So it's a complicated answer to a complicated question. But again, I'm not qualified to give you an authoritative answer. Proceed at your own risk. I would not advocate this course if you're completely unconscious to what you're hearing and what you're seeing.
Yeah. Before we go on to the next question, let's look at again at the course. It's a website, Blogging Theology Academy.com. Excuse me. Applications are now open for the new diploma in programming, video games, and society, taught by Shahid. The start date is Sunday, the 15th of June. 2 terms of 13 weeks. And you can read more details about that, the admissions requirements, the fees, the application process and deadline, which is the 12th of this month. And there's much more material here on the website. So please have a look at it for your information. We have a couple more questions. Here is a very interesting one. Will the course cover the development of games? I feel the state of flow when one is programming or debugging is a beautiful aspect of the human mind as granted to us by the grace of God.
MashaAllah, that is a really, really good question. Yes, we will cover the principles of programming. And I don't just mean the stuff that you can pick up from anywhere. It will be heavily personalized, given my background in video games development. I started in 1982, which is a lifetime ago. And I learned assembler programming, so as low level as it gets, on 8-bit computers using cassette tapes and 16 KB of memory. If rockets had developed as much as microprocessors since that time, we would be doing round trips to Mars in hours instead of years. It's very, very hard to actually visualize the exponential leap in power and capability that computers have given us. There's been no phenomenon like it in the history of humanity. Programming is an incredible endeavor. I highly recommend it as a way of ordering one's thinking, of taming the nafs. It's one of the greatest ego destroyers it's possible to engage in, because machines are intrinsically stupid. There's a very famous saying, garbage in, garbage out. You have to be explicit in your instructions to the machine to get correct results. That forces an ordering of thinking that is paralleled only by mathematics, perhaps logic as well. So if you combine mathematics, logic, and language, you get programming. Except that programming is dynamic and can exceed the capability of any logician, mathematician, or anyone for that matter, because they're able to rapidly execute that code at a speed no human being can. So the idea is, yes, they're very dumb, but they're so fast you don't even notice, right? And programming is the superpower that allows you to exploit the full power of these remarkable machines. It does induce flow state because it's a discipline. You have to learn exactly how to create code. And I will be teaching the principles of that in the first semester with a few scattered examples of those principles, how to write code that doesn't frustrate you, how to learn in a way that doesn't frustrate you in an ordered manner. And we'll cover practice in the second semester, where we go much more deeply into actual systems, how they interact, how they can be created to encourage flow state, and so on.
Good. Next question. Which game engine will be used in the diploma?
It's a great question, one that I've considered for quite some time. I'm happy to use any, but I will likely use Unity. The reason for that is it's freely available on all platforms for personal use. It uses what I consider to be one of the best languages ever devised, C#. Although it is possible to write really bad C#, I'll teach you how not to write bad C# and how to write really good C# for Unity. And the games that you create using Unity can be run on any device. More philosophically, I would encourage Godot, which is open source and also freely available. It's not quite as advanced as Unity, and it's not as widely used as Unity. We won't be using Unreal Engine simply because I would like you to learn how to code. And C++, particularly the Unreal variety, is labyrinthine in its complexity. And I don't think it's suitable for beginners. You might want to look at Blueprint, but again, the underlying system is so complex that you wouldn't necessarily be learning Blueprint. You would be learning how Unreal works. And that ties you in very deeply, enmeshes you in one of the modern traps of programming, which is this system is better. No, that system is better. No, use this engine. No, use that engine. What I want to teach you are the principles that are common across all engines that will stand you in good stead, whether you use an engine or don't use one at all, because it's possible to write code that runs without an engine and entirely uses your own code to run.
Okay. There's another question here, which I've just lost, which is very good. It was about what you had worked on yourself. Apologies for that. I had it and then I got distracted. Just scrolling up. Oh, here we are. Akil. What games have you worked on, brother? He says.
Countless. There are countless games, and it depends on which capacity. So I started as what they called in those days a bedroom programmer or a bedroom coder. Nowadays they're called indies, much more fashionable. But that's how I started. And so I learned to program back then. I made some games that were well known in the 80s. Then I worked in larger teams. I also made music for video games at one point. Then I moved into publishing, where I acted as a producer on certain titles, giving creative input. I was at PlayStation for a decade, where I started development programs in the Middle East and in India. That was done circa 2008 onwards. I created a team called Strategic Content that completely changed the landscape for independent developers and their access to consoles, and was responsible for securing an exclusive of No Man's Sky and Hellblade for PlayStation, which were major coups at the time. I think indirectly I helped to add astonishing value to all the companies involved, helping seed the ground for numerous publishers that went on to become publicly listed or sold to larger organizations. So the value created directly or indirectly by my work at PlayStation amounted to over $1 billion US. When I left PlayStation, I created an independent development company called Ultimatum Games. I hope you appreciate the irony. The Ultimatum game was one that was discussed in the Russell Crowe movie I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. And there I made a game called Virtue Reality, which was a free-to-play mobile game commissioned by Islamic Relief, who you're probably all aware of, an Islamic NGO, the first game ever funded an Islamic NGO. And it turned the existing free-to-play paradigm on its head. So what happened was that you could do microtransactions in the game, but every microtransaction went to charity. So you could spend money in the game, real money in the game, but any of the money that you spent was going purely to charity to support their relief efforts around the world. It also represented every type of human being, every type of Muslim dress, custom, skin color. And when shown to a school, the students at Nottingham at the National Video Game Museum remarked emotionally that it was the first time they'd ever seen characters that looked like them represented in a positive way in a video game. It was covered by all kinds of newspapers, TV, media, and so on. Worked on a few other games there as well, but that was the most notable and the most relevant to this discussion.
Fantastic. I mean, we're going for an hour now. I don't know how much further you can go on for, but there are more questions, some of them quite detailed. How much longer do you think we should continue this live stream?
Entirely up to you, Paul. I'm happy to answer any questions that you think are worth being answered.
Okay. Well, we'll continue for a short while longer, but almost at random here. There are lots of interesting new questions, actually. By the way, this is something slightly tangential to me, really. Please do more lives. The opportunity to ask direct questions gives it another deeper dimension. I think this is a very helpful point. So thank you for that comment. I'll bear that in mind. I do need to do more live streaming. This is true. So thank you for that encouragement. It's very encouraging indeed. Okay, there's another one here from Zainab. Would you recommend some books, or could you recommend some books?
Yes, there will be a reading list in the diploma.
Excellent. That's very good. And the next one is, how will AI affect the way games are programmed? How do we avoid coders being dumbed down by too much AI use, and how will the course integrate it?
Very good question. I've seen a lot of projects recently that were started by people who thought AI could make stuff and then had to be cleaned up by real programmers. The biggest problem with AI at the moment is that of hallucination.
Wow.
In that it confidently assumes correctness without realizing that what it's proposing is incorrect. It's extremely good for snippets, but it's useless at promoting understanding of why programs work, how they work, how to fix them when they go wrong. It can be of use in the creation of content. Here's the thing. Remember when I said that human beings are really good at spotting patterns? It won't be long before humans can say, yeah, that's AI, even when the AI does its best to make itself look like it's not AI and that it was generated by a real person. And yes, content and visuals and even audio produced by AI are remarkable. It's an amazing parlor trick. I hope you don't mind me using the term parlor trick. But that's because people who are looking at what's being done have not yet developed the discernment to distinguish art from that which isn't. And I'm sure that, for example, an editor at a book publisher would be able to discern the difference between a book written by a human being and that written by AI. And one of the reasons for that is what makes human beings unique is that we are localized in space and time. That gives us access to a linear string of associations that identify us uniquely. That experience is unique. That's what goes into a game. If you take an amalgamation of the sum total of the output of that knowledge and insert it into a program by AI, what you're left with is the Douglas Adams example of the most powerful computer in the world answering the question, what is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, with the answer 42. Okay, fine. But the real question should have been a lot more detailed, a lot more involved. And the path that you took to get there is more important than the answer. So that is lost with AI because AI is not temporally and spatially localized. It does not have a single view or experience. Human beings will always crave that. And this issue of hallucination, which still hasn't been addressed, even when you ask AI to verify its answers before answering, it will still make mistakes. I mean, I had a great session with ChatGPT. I call my instance of ChatGPT, I call it Merlin because it's a sorcerer, right? But you can't entirely trust it.
No, you're right.
Right. So I call it Merlin. Merlin's been very helpful today, but Merlin couldn't tell me the time. And I thought that was really interesting. I had to keep correcting it on the current time. Why is that? It's because it's not localized in space and time. Has no concept. Has to remember that I'm in the UK. How it still doesn't know the time is beyond me. But that's the kind of confident assertion that it still makes despite the billions and billions of dollars of hardware and software that's been thrown at it. And that will continue to happen, I think, for the foreseeable future. Will we touch upon it? Yes. Will we be derisory about it? No, but we will be realistic about its limitations. Remember, this course teaches the principles of code, the principles of programming, the principles of video games, and how philosophically as Muslims we can engage with all of that. AI is just one tool among many that will help us in the expansion of knowledge and skills that we've already attained. But if we don't have that foundation, which I'm aiming to teach, inshallah, none of that will make any sense to us and we won't be able to tell what's going wrong and why.
Gosh. This is a very practical question. Any way to reach out to you? A preferred method of contact?
Yes. At the moment, I'm not very active on X, but I have a newsletter. The newsletter is newsletter.dancingmonkeys.net. If you subscribe to that, you can message me through Substack.
Okay, thank you. Another question: Would you say designing physical games, board games, tabletop, card games, etc., make good foundations for video game design / development?
Absolutely, 100%. No expansion needed. I tell you this from the weight of decades of experience. I used to scoff at that, but although it's not entirely covering the ground that a video game will cover, if you get the basics of board games, tabletop games right, you can be sure they'll work in a video game. The converse is not necessarily true.
Very interesting. I think we might be running out of questions now, I think. I mean, there are comments, for example, I'll just show them. The robots shall inherit the earth, maybe, and slightly more wonderful comment there. But I can't see any substantive questions. If I've forgotten any or overlooked them, please remind me now in a fresh comment, and I'll ask them. But I'll just reiterate, of course, that this Q&A session is very much in the service of applications, which are now open for BT Academy's new diploma in programming, video games, and society, taught by Shahid. He has an amazing background in the industry, in many different sectors of the industry. You can apply now. Just obviously go to the application form on BTA, and you will be able to apply yourself. What does this mean? The converse may not be true. Could you expand on that? Do you understand? Does that make sense to you, Shahid?
Yes. So I was talking about, I was answering the question relating to tabletop and board games and so on, whether they would be a good discipline to learn in order to improve at making video games. And I said absolutely. But making good video games is not necessarily going to teach you how to make good board and tabletop games, because the reason I answer that way is because the scope of video games is potentially unlimited, right? You can create living systems that can't be modeled in a cut down form. Let's say, for example, you had a card game, and in that card game, it was a deck builder. You had a number of attributes, you had a number of particular cards you could play. In a video game, you could change the attributes dynamically. You could buff those attributes. You could nerf those attributes. But for those who don't know, buff means improve, nerf means degrade. These are gamer terms. You could not realistically or adequately model that in a card game. So it's a tighter discipline to make a card game, a board game, tabletop game, than it is to make a video game. Video games are more expansive, more dynamic. And therefore, the disciplines you learn in that will allow you to make a more complex game, but not necessarily one that would scale well down to tabletop, card game, or board game.
Okay, perhaps the last question. Why is there a lack of Muslim representation as heroic characters in video games?
Because up until now, people have been too short-sighted to see the market. I'll give you an example. I'm a pretty handy Black Ops 6 player now. I'd say I'm in the top 1% in the world. I've Prestige Legend rank 1000, which is the maximum in the game. I've logged countless hours in the game. I'm ashamed to say that some of it might have been ghafla, but I've tried to write essays based on my experience. I've not released those essays yet, but will in a collection at some point. It's shown me many lessons, and I've learned a lot about myself in playing it, my shortcomings, my strengths, my weaknesses. So it's been an analysis tool. I play with the operator called Nazir, Pakistani, visibly Muslim, has a beard. Of all the characters in the game, apart from the one who doesn't speak at all, he swears the least, which I like. He sounds like a Pakistani. He looks like a Muslim. And I have paid money for every bundle I can buy that includes his operator skin. Right? That's called commercial feedback. The more people, the more Muslims. Oh, and by the way, I think I've seen more people play as Nazir than any other character. So clearly, either lots of non-Muslims, non-Pakistanis like playing as a Pakistani Muslim more than they care to admit, or there are a lot of Muslims playing this game, a lot of Pakistanis, and I think it's the latter. So I know it's popular in the Arab world, I know it's popular with Pakistanis, I know it's popular with Muslims, and they're all obviously picking Nazir, right? Because he's dressed in a halal way, he looks like a Muslim, he doesn't even swear anywhere near as much as the other characters. I think there's only one bit of swearing, and that's during exfil when he's extremely excited and agitated. So it's a market thing. As I said before, if the market says, I will buy everything in a decent game that corresponds to my religious preferences, what do you think the developers are going to do next? It's the Asda argument.
Okay, well, I think at that point, I can't think of any more substantive questions left to ask. So just a final reminder, application form for the BT Academy's Diploma in Programming, Video Games and Society is now available on our website, bloggingtheologyacademy.com. Please have a look at it, sign up, much more information about the instructor himself, who had the pleasure of listening to this evening. And I think we'll leave it there. 1/4 hours. It's been absolutely fascinating, I must say. Thank you so much, Shahid, for your time. Very much looking forward to this new short course on Blogging Theology Academy. And we'll leave it there. So this will go up on BT, Blogging Theology, for people to watch in the coming days. So thank you very much, Shahid, and everyone else for your fascinating, extremely intelligent, insightful questions. And inshallah, the course will be a success. So until next, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.